Republican Mike Huckabee, former governor of Arkansas, presidential candidate, father of current Republican governor of Arkansas, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, former Baptist minister, and so on and so forth, a guy who should just know better, is joining the ever-increasing list of prominent right-wing figures who are endorsing or spouting off incendiary rhetoric about civil war and political violence and Donald Trump. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. Maybe check out my Patreon. I'd appreciate the support. All right, folks, so at the risk of beating a dead horse, as I've said before, I feel like every time this comes up from a prominent right-winger, it deserves its own attention. It's not something that we should take for granted. It's not something that we should not cover or discuss simply because another prominent right-winger a few days ago or a week ago did something similar. This is incredibly important. There is an ever-expanding list of prominent conservative and Republican leaders and officials, people who wield state power or used to wield state power or want to wield state power or just wield vast informal power as conservative thought leaders, who are either endorsing or regurgitating incendiary, violent rhetoric and threats of civil war. So I want to turn your attention to Mike Huckabee. He used to be, again, the Republican governor of Arkansas. He ran for president. He is the father of Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who was Donald Trump's press secretary. She's the current Republican governor of Arkansas. And he's a Baptist, or he either is still an ordained or used to be an ordained Baptist minister, right? So between the moral compunctions and the political compunctions as somebody who was supposed to be a member of the Party of Law and Order, Mike Huckabee should know better. But this is what he has to say about the 2024 election, Donald Trump's indictments and prosecutions, and what it might mean for the future.
Do you know how political opponents to those in power are dealt with in third world dictatorships, banana republics, and communist regimes? Well, it's simple. The people in power use their police agencies to arrest their opponents for made-up crimes in an attempt to discredit them, bankrupt them, imprison them, exile them, or all of the above. And if you're not paying attention, you may not realize that Joe Biden is using exactly those tactics to make sure that Donald Trump is not his opponent in 2024. Here's the problem. If these tactics end up working to keep Trump from winning or even running in 2024, it is going to be the last American election that will be decided by ballots rather than bullets. Do you know how political...
All right, folks. So I don't even know where to begin with this because most of this is stuff that we've talked about before. But again, I think when another prominent right-winger, and it seems like the list is going to increase in perpetuity until they have some sort of like fundamental paradigm shift, which brings them back to reality, it needs to be talked about. So first things first, the idea that we're a banana republic. It is true that if leaders like Vladimir Putin, for example, uses the power of the state to try to isolate his political opposition simply because they're a political threat to him, that is banana republic stuff. But that's not what's going on here. As we've discussed in previous videos, President Biden's Justice Department, we actually have compelling evidence that they went out of their way. They bent over backwards, both with respect to the national defense documents, classified documents case, as well as others. They bent over backwards to try to avoid prosecuting Trump because they knew it was going to be incredibly complicated, incredibly risky, and incredibly controversial. If anything, they politicized it by not treating Donald Trump the way they would have anybody else. It's something for which I fault Merrick Garland and the Justice Department. They actually gave him more slack, much more slack than they would the average citizen. We also know that they tried for a year and a half to quietly get the national defense documents back from Trump instead of pursuing legal recourse against him in the beginning. But more importantly, it's also banana republic stuff to not hold criminal ex-leaders accountable simply because they are ex-leaders or are aspiring to be leaders again in the future. That's banana republic stuff. If you have rule of law, if you have a constitution, if you have a body of statutory law, then everybody should be held accountable under that law. Okay? Now, certain leaders are certainly given certain privileges while they're in office, as we've discussed before. But at the end of the day, especially when you are no longer a leader and you are subject to the full purview of the law because you no longer have to run the country, you should be held to the full account of the law. They only talk about the one part of the banana republic thing, which, by the way, doesn't apply here. Moreover, Donald Trump's indictments are the product of grand juries, okay, which are civilian citizens. They're not President Biden's Justice Department. It's not Merrick Garland. Nobody's making this unilateral decision. Grand juries were impaneled. And then based on the evidence presented to those civilians, Donald Trump's peers, They recommended charges against Trump. That is the exact opposite of a banana republic thing. But moreover, Mike Huckabee, notice he didn't just mention the indictments. He also hinted at keeping Trump off the ballot, an obvious reference to the ever-increasing question about whether or not Donald Trump is disqualified from holding office and should be on the ballot because of his participation or giving aid and comfort to the January 6th insurrection. That's a matter of constitutional law. That's a constitutional disqualification. And if it applies to Donald Trump, then if you obey and or swear fealty to the Constitution, which we're supposed to do since it's the supreme law of the land, then the Constitution demands that you keep Trump off the ballot and not allow him to hold office. Now, again, Huckabee can contest it. He can say, I don't think it applies to Trump. But he doesn't even make that case. He's just like, Donald Trump shouldn't be held off or kept off the ballot. Well, what if he's not constitutionally eligible to run because of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment? So once again, this man, who again is a Baptist minister, he was a Republican politician for years, and now he's a talk show host, he is advocating for Donald Trump to be above the law. As a current president, a former president, or an aspiring president, it doesn't matter. Rules for thee, not for me. It's insane. It's absolute madness. And again, that list ever increases, especially when not only is this Mike Huckabee's insane rationale, but again, that very final part, like if Donald Trump is held accountable, either because of constitutional disqualification or criminal conviction by a jury of his peers, which may not happen, but it's possible, Mike Huckabee is saying, well, then there will be civil war. It's going to be bullets, not ballots, which decide elections. It's incredibly dangerous and irresponsible rhetoric. And it's further proof that the Republican Party is an authoritarian cult of personality, because Mike Huckabee did not step onto the scene. He's not Marjorie Trader Green or Lauren Boebert and others. He was an establishment Republican figure. I mean, a far-right evangelical to be sure, but he should know better than this. Anyway, as the list grows, we're going to continue to cover it because this is not normal. And again, as a reminder, there's no counterweight to this on the left. This is a uniquely Republican problem and further proof that the Republican Party is objectively, in terms of its leadership, in terms of its values, in terms of its animating principles at this point in 2023, on its very best day, it is objectively worse than the Democratic Party on its very worst day. And don't forget it.